All right, you can catch our guest on the Marty and McGee show. It airs every college football game day at 9 a.m. on the SEC network. He's half of that equation. He's Ryan McGee. McGee, big trip to Athens in your future. I know you're excited about that. I want to start off, though. Look, I can't help but feel like I sound cynical when I say this, but the timing of Vince Dooley passing obviously wasn't going to be great no matter the circumstances, but in the context of Georgia's season, I just feel bad that there's not more time to look back on what he did. Georgia goes into the Florida game, then they roll out of that into the Tennessee game, but you did a really great perspective piece on his legacy as a coach, and if you haven't seen it, I invite you to go check it out. I think you tweeted out a link or shared it on your Instagram or both. But for you personally, I mean, that feature was great. It summed up his life so well. But for you personally, I'm curious if there's an anecdote or a story or anything that immediately comes to mind when it comes to dealing with Coach Dooley.
He's just a special guy, and he's part of that. You know, I'm a Tennessee alum, and I was there with Johnny Majors. And to me, there's that era of the 70s, 80s, first part of the 90s, and it was Pat Dye and Vince Dooley and Johnny Majors, and I mean even the next tier guys, Billy Brewer. You know, these guys all felt like, you know, Ken Hatfield. They were the heroes of their schools and came back to coach or at least stayed in the conference. And they just, I said this on SEC Nation last week. They were like gods on earth, but were completely approachable. And that's what, there was just something about that group that was special. And to me, Dooley was the guy, because Dooley was kind of this connection between, you know, started coaching when he's in his early 30s in the early 1960s, and Bear Bryant was really just getting things rolling in Alabama. And then when Vince Dooley retired as coach, you know, these young guys were taking over. And so he was kind of the bridge between those two eras. But my first experience with Vince Dooley in person was his last game as a head coach. My dad, as you know, was a college football official for 40 years, and he worked the Gator Bowl. It was Michigan State and Georgia. It was New Year's Eve down in Jacksonville, and it was Coach Dooley's last game, and Ray Goff was you know, the head coach in waiting essentially, and Goff was really calling the game. And so we got down there expecting to get a classic Georgia, let's run the football 60 times and grind them down and win the game. Exactly. And Ray Goff was slinging it and dinging it, man. And then, meanwhile, Michigan State responded with that. And so it was, for the era, it was a shootout. You kids are going to Google the score and go, oh, this wasn't a shootout. Well, for then it was. For 1988, 89 it was.
Andre Rison taking on all of Georgia's defense.
Right, and so that was the story. So years later, we had Coach Dooley on Marty and McGee. It was at the SEC Championship game a couple years ago. And we sit down, and we're actually going to tape this segment. We're getting ready to tape the segment, and Coach Dooley leans over and he says, Ryan. I said, yeah. He goes, how's your father? I said, Coach, he's doing great. In fact, he told me to tell you hello. He said, your father worked my last game as a head football coach. I go, that's right. And he said, that's the night your father and I joined forces to turn Andre Rison into a millionaire. I go, you're right. And then he told me, he said that night, he said, he finally went to Goff and the staff at one point and go, okay, I was going to let y'all do this. I have to take over now because y'all are going to give me a heart attack in my last football game. And so he's just a special man. And then I got to know him really more over the last 10 years than I did, you know, even when I didn't really know him at all. He's athletic director. And so getting to know him and him always asking how you're doing. We talked about his brother Bill, who I knew always want to talk about Dad, want to talk about the Civil War, want to talk about, you know, the type of bushes they had chosen for the hedges when they were replaced. I mean, just every time I talk to him, I learn something. That's a coach.
One of a kind, no doubt about that. So looking ahead to this weekend's game, riding off of the momentum of the college football playoff reveal show, gets us talking every week. You can say that the BCS has gotten the picks right every time, regardless of what the committee does. But look, we're not going to sit around if this is the BCS and say, oh, man, those computers suck. We talk about the committee, right?
Yeah.
So Tennessee's 1, Georgia's 3. DawgsHQ tweeted out, Georgia's in the Dale spot. Let's go. And our NASCAR fans appreciated that. But we had a Tennessee guy who follows me, and he said, well, Wes, Tennessee's Ross Chastain in the number 1 car riding around the wall.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty good comparison just by car numbers, but I think Tennessee deserves a little bit more credit than that. They're not desperate barreling down the track right now. They're in control of things.
Yeah, what's interesting about Tennessee, and this will be the ultimate test of that, is Josh Heupel. I keep saying this. Josh Heupel's EKG never leaves level. It just stays right there, right in the middle. And he was like that as a player, finished second in the Heisman vote when he was quarterback at Oklahoma. But he never leaves level. And as a result, the team, for the most part, never leaves level emotionally. And Hendon Hooker is a huge part of that because that's why he and Heupel get along so well. It's that connection. It's that same kind of staying cool no matter what. And so, I mean, listen, the morning of the Alabama game, biggest home game at Tennessee in a couple of decades. And Alabama's the biggest rival and all that stuff, and Alabama's Alabama. Josh Heupel came walking through to do SEC Nation. Got looked like he was going to teach a chemistry class. He had his shirt tail out and his pants looked like he just pulled them out of a pile of dirty clothes, and he just like, hey, yo, man, what's up? And I was like, you're not going to coach the spring game, but that's on purpose, and the team feeds off of that. This will be the ultimate test of that because you can control the hype around a game in the bubble of the football complex. When you've just been named the number 1 team in the country, it's really, really difficult to do that. It's difficult to remind 19-year-olds that, hey, you're not that big of a deal. You still got to win the football game on Saturday. So, to me, this will be the ultimate test of, will that approach works? Because that's the difference between this Tennessee team and the team a year ago, certainly over the last 16 years, which is they get off the bus expecting to win the game, and they stay. They stay. Even when Alabama recovered that awful fumble for a touchdown to take the lead, in Neyland Stadium, even when Bryce Young had the ball with a couple minutes to go, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, the team was never rattled. And so this will be the ultimate test of that if you're Tennessee.
I want to give you the opportunity here to translate this matchup and speak a little bit of McGee, okay? If this is a Star Wars scene or if this is a Star Wars analogy, what comes to mind when you think about number 1 Georgia in the AP poll taking on number 1 Tennessee in the college football playoff?
This is easy, man. Georgia's the Death Star. They are. They got all the toys. They got all the tools. They got the biggest weapon. They're the defending national champs. For what it's worth, every week on ESPN.com, we do our playoff rankings. I've got Georgia number 1. They've not done anything to make me think they shouldn't be number 1. So that's it. It's the impenetrable machine, right? And so if you're Tennessee, again, this is easy. This is the trench run. You're smaller. You're not as deep. You got to be more creative because you don't have the toolbox that Georgia does, and you got to stay quick and nimble and make that trench run. And so, if you're Georgia, it's recognizing the one flaw and defending it. I don't know that they have one. If you're Tennessee, it's finding that one flaw and exploiting it, and then also applying so much pressure and keeping, the defense so back on its heels. Like, what are they doing right now? And how in the world would they dare do this? Then, that's it. You're Red Squadron. You're making your run. So I feel like that was a softball. That was a toss-up.
I didn't want to put the words in your mouth and say that Georgia's already the Death Star. I think Nick Saban is still Darth Sidious, but we'll see.
He is. But I tell you this, though, that team right now, Georgia looks an awful lot more like Alabama did 6 years ago than Alabama does. Because, again, I go back to that Tennessee game. It's 7 penalties in the first quarter. And it wasn't – they're doing this all – and they did this last year too. Georgia fans know it. Alabama couldn't get out of its own way. Forget injuries and forget all those things. It's – procedure penalties, and it's
that's the crazy
substitution
thing.
Infractions and that kind of stuff, and that's why Saban looks like the anger guy from Inside Out all the time, because he just can't. What are we doing? Georgia's not making those mistakes. Georgia's is a well-oiled machine. So it's y'all are the Death Star now. I say y'all because I know where your loyalties lie. Sure, it is what it is.
Last thing for you. and this is just something I've observed that I'm kind of fascinated by. There are a small group of Georgia fans on our message board, interact with us on social media, that are a little annoyed that Tennessee's getting all this hype and Georgia wasn't. And I think it's fascinating because typically I think a lot of those same fans don't really care what the media has to say. But for me, I'm going to set up what I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's because Georgia's been there. They've been knocking on the door, for the last couple decades, give or take a couple teams, right? Tennessee is like the silver bullet with Josh Heupel right now that's come out of nowhere. And you were Maverick for Halloween. People like nostalgia. Yeah. And Tennessee reminds them of the 90s, and that's my theory on that.
No. I really believe that it is people who truly love college football. Like the sport as a whole. Everybody has their school. Everybody has their team. I get all that. But it is in the best interest of the game that a Tennessee be relevant and that the Tennessee-Alabama game matters. And that I think it's important that Nebraska be relevant. I think it's important. I thought it was important that Michigan made the playoff a year ago, no matter what they did once they got there, because they were relevant again. I think it's important for someone in the Pac-12. I need USC or Oregon or somebody to step up and make the playoff. To me, the game is better when the brand names are relevant. And all due respect to the Georgia fans who are complaining, this was y'all 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, when Georgia suddenly started making the playoff, and Georgia suddenly was in the national championship conversation, legit in the national championship conversation for the first time since Vince Dooley. To me, that was great for college football. So if it makes Georgia fans feel any better, when Georgia started this run that they're on now, the complaint that I received from Alabama fans was, well, why are you talking about Georgia all the time? Right. We're still us, man. We're the defending national champs. It's because we're excited to see the good brands relevant. So, yeah. And guess what? When Billy Napier gets it turned around at Florida, and he's going to make y'all mad because people are going to be talking about Florida going into the Georgia-Florida game because everyone believes that Florida might actually have a chance. So, yeah, it's just I'm with you, dude. It's nostalgia is a huge part of it. And it's also, it hurts your heart a little bit when all the CFB 150 stuff was happening 3 years ago. And you're pushing Tennessee stories and pushing Nebraska stories and pushing Michigan stories and pushing Florida State stories. And the youngsters who are working on this stuff are going, why? Well, it's because they're the brand. So, yeah, Georgia fans, this was y'all just a minute ago. So just hang on. If you win the game, it'll be fine.
Yeah. If Georgia wins the game, Tennessee will probably still make the playoff. So we'll see about that. McGee, you're the man. Thank you so much. Watch him Saturday and say hey to him if you're around Athens and if you can reach him. I mean, there's probably going to be 1,800 people between you and him at any given moment with the crowd coming into the Classic City. Catch up with you soon, Ryan. Take care, man.
Yeah, well, it always cuts through because everybody's Marty, and one guy yells McGee. I usually can hear them. So yeah, I'll find y'all.
Be that person. See you, man.